Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second interview of Women Leading People. I'm so excited to have my guest, Melissa K. Jones, joining us today. And today's interview is going to be around 5 communication tips for new managers. But really, we're going to be covering all of Melissa's story, how she got into management, and how she has spent the last, Melissa, you'll tell us how many years, but she's had 20 years of experience as a leader, and now she leads businesses and helps businesses to drive really great results. So really excited to have you here, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for the invitation, Eva. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So this Women Leading People has been put together to help to inspire and empower women as people managers. And I'm trying to bring in as many women leaders as I can to help tell their stories and to help empower you with their stories as well. Now, we will be open to any comments or questions that you have. So feel free at any point in the chat just to type in your question, and we'll try to get through it during the interview as well. So Melissa, we'll get started. Can you just start by telling us about how you got into your first role within management?
Yes. So my first jump into leadership for my career was right around the end of my 20th year, right before my 21st birthday. I was working for a property management company at the time here in the States and had an excellent boss. And she knew my desire to grow within the company and to move up into a leadership role. And so it had been something that we had talked about in our one-on-one reviews. And then when a position had opened up, she shared it with me so that I was able to apply. And so I think the first communication tip, if you're starting out or have a desire to be in a leadership management role, is to communicate your goals with your boss. Like, people don't know what you want until you tell them. And so having that conversation early and sharing your goals and not expecting them to automatically assume that you want a promotion, and then keeping that communication open over the time, even if you don't get that initial role and you're waiting for something else to open up. So that's really important as well. With that initial role, I was in that position for about 3 months, and then I transferred out to a lateral position at another property, which required me to move to another state. And at that property, then I did the first hiring and bringing on vendors. So it was a big role and really just proving myself and who I was and what I was capable of. But I would say also, just going back to trying to get into your first role, it's really important that your performance shows that you're capable of doing work, but also how you work with your peers. What's that relationship look like? Because management is more about personal relationships than it is about high performers.
Yeah, so you found yourself pretty early on within the stages of your career, knowing that that's what you wanted to do. How did you find that transition from working with your peers to then obviously managing some of them?
So at a young age, I would say it was very hard. Specifically when that first initial role, when I'm going directly from peers to then a promotion. So the one thing that helped me is I wasn't moving directly above my peers, but I was still friends with peers that were in the role that I was moving into. So and it continues to happen throughout my career. Anytime that you're going into a leadership role, a lot of times it's sometimes within the same department or a complementary department that you've worked with people in that department before. So and the communication tips is make sure that you define what the boundaries are now that you're in this new role, or reset what those boundaries are. It can be really challenging, especially if you have closer friendships with peers, because they'll want to still have those same type of relationships. But when you're in a management role, you're responsible for other people. And so you're not allowed to play favorites. You need to treat everyone the same. There's information that you can't disclose because you're looking out for the business and for the team. And so defining those boundaries is critical in order to maintaining the relationship, but also having that respect from everybody that you are now responsible for. So number 2, define and reset boundaries.
And I think that's such a hugely important one because, like you said, it will be people in different departments who you will have had a different relationship with. So I'd love to hear in practice, how do you actually have that conversation? How do you sit someone down? Do you call a meeting? And what did you say? And how did they take it? If you have some examples from your first experience.
So, telling on my age, that was a long time ago, I would say over 15 years ago. So the way that I handled the conversation then was way different than how I'd handle the conversation now. Then I didn't handle the conversation well. I would say like one of the first things that I had to do when that first role where I was only there for 3 months, my first time into leadership, I had to let go of an employee. And that was really tough because I consider that person a friend outside of work, but also within the workplace, like they weren't measuring up to the performance standards and there was different things going on. And so that was a really difficult conversation for me. And I know that I didn't manage it well at the time. And the good thing is, I think with growth and being adults, you understand like your role and those situations. And so we are still acquaintances / friends for that reason now. We could definitely have a conversation. I ran into them years later in a different setting and we got along well. But at that time, I would say, like, now looking back, what I would do differently is exactly what I explained. Say, I enjoy our friendship and I enjoy like working with you, like if they're not a friend, but just like a close acquaintance within the department, and say, I want you to excel and I want to do well in my role in order to help everyone that's on the team. So these are the things that are going to have to change in order for us to work together. So just laying out what those specific things are, saying like, there are certain things that I can't discuss with you and defining what those are. So like you can't define promotions, you can't define salaries, you can't share performance issues. Like there's things that you can't talk about anymore because of the privacy and of each individual on the team and respecting those people. They wouldn't want their story told to anybody else. So the same applies in that situation. And again, not favoritism. So like I really had to pull back and not be friends with people that were on my team. I can be friendly with people on my team. I can know them. I can know what their interests are. I can have like great one-on-one relationships because I want to see people excel in their role and be promoted, take on additional responsibilities. But I can't be your friend because it just creates really sticky situations because honestly, like we're all human. Like we have curiosity, we want the best for ourselves. We tend to be selfish. We think things are about us when they're not about us. We have a tendency sometimes to overthink situations or to perceive them differently based off of like our own personal experiences. So really defining in those boundaries and having that conversation up front. And then also too, like if there are things that you notice throughout the relationship that you didn't define initially, having that conversation and like bringing them back up to speed, say like, I know I did this in the past. This is where I'm at now. This is what needs to change or what can't happen, and communicating it to them. If you're assuming that they know or just like trying to sweep it under the rug, that's when elephants grow in the room and it becomes really awkward and it can make a bad situation where their performance just starts to decline. It can increase gossip. And so as a leader, it's your responsibility to have those hard conversations. It's your responsibility to make sure that the elephant doesn't get in the room. And a lot of time the elephant gets in the room because we're afraid to have those conversations.
Definitely. And I think those are two great tips. So putting yourself forward for the type of role that you want and communicating that because people won't know. And also having those difficult conversations, setting the expectations of the new ways of working together. I guess it's also considering that sometimes letting someone go, even though it definitely won't feel like that in the moment, is ultimately probably a better move for that person, because they're also not getting what they would need to excel in their careers. So it's definitely bad news to hear, but it probably gives them a much better opportunity in future. So seeing the potential benefit in the long term that will come from that can probably help to make that decision a little bit easier, or that conversation a little bit easier. Rather, I know that's definitely something that I've had to do as well, and it was tough. So great. So having those difficult conversations, what's next?
I would say, in regards to the difficult conversations, because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Like, how do I give constructive feedback? How do I give feedback when like the performance isn't meeting expectations, or you know that someone's capable of more? And I think that first starts with making sure that you're having regular one-on-ones with your team members. And really, when you're in a management role, it's about people more than it is about performance. Because if you can get those people relationships and you can understand like what stressors they have, what motivates them, what their goals are, what their learning styles are, all these different things, then you can really get out of their way so that they can perform really well, but also support them in their goals and their career, whether that's long-term with the company or whether that's just momentarily within this chapter and they do exceptionally well. So having those one-on-one conversations is critical, because then you build that rapport and that trust with the employee that you really care about who they are, what their goals are, that their career path, whether it's within the department or whether they want to long-term move into another role, or whether this company is a stepping stone for them into something else. And that's completely fine. But building that trust and rapport, because then when it comes time that their performance slides, or there's maybe a behavioral issue with a colleague, that you can then address it and say, this is what I'm perceiving, and then describe the situation. Ask them to then share what they saw or like what they were doing, because you don't want to automatically assume that you know what was going on, or to attack them by saying, and I put parentheses for attack, but you don't want to automatically come at somebody and say, I saw you did this, why did you do this? Like, that automatically makes people close down and become defensive. And really, you are wanting to help them. So saying exactly what you observed, and then asking them to describe the situation to you, because there could be, and a lot of times there are, nuances to the situation that you are not aware of. So I'll give you an example. Mm-hmm. One time, I was sending out emails that had directions for employees in regards to compliance issues, and I needed them to respond to the email. And so majority of people responded timely, and then I had a couple people that were still straggling and hadn't responded yet. And so at the time, and again, this is all part of like the maturity growth curve, I saw it as disrespectful, because I thought that it was intentional, that they were choosing not to respond and weren't taking me seriously. And so I went and had a conversation with the employee, and understanding then like the nuance of they were just busy and they were overwhelmed, and it had nothing to do with me or a lack of respect. It was just more a matter of like needing help to manage the amount of information that was coming through to them. And so I think that's why it's so important to have those one-on-one conversations and build those relationships, because then you can understand like the nuance behind different situations when they arise. So that way you can help people instead of assume things and then discourage them even more.
Yeah, I think always giving your team, and this is probably good for all of your communications, assume the best until you're proven otherwise, because a lot of the times there will be things that are missing. And you actually brought up a really interesting point. You said at the time you were worried whether they weren't taking you seriously or that you weren't being respected, which is probably quite a common thing to feel as a new manager, right? You've come into the role and you're asking people to do things and people aren't doing them. And then you just, you feel that. So how did you get around that? And how did you work with that and kind of, I guess, handle it?
So I would also go to say that I don't think that situation is specific to new managers. I think that extends throughout the lifetime of being responsible for people, that our ego creeps up and we take things personally, and it really requires daily to be self-aware of like what our own personal challenges are and making sure that we don't project those onto situations with the people that we're responsible for. But in regards to like having that respect to be taken seriously, it really comes down to communication again. And so piggybacking off the previous point is like, once you ask them to explain the situation, then talk to them to say, okay, these are the things that I need from you and the reason why I need them from you. Because a lot of times we know things and we're just so busy in like managing relationships and managing work and making sure that we're meeting metrics and all the things for the department that we forget to share like the importance or the reasoning behind all the asks that we have. And so taking time to explain it to the individual to say, okay, this is the importance behind it. This is how it impacts others on the team. This is how it impacts customers, whatever the case may be. So when you put them in that position of then ownership of saying like, now I know like how my role impacts other people, and these are the tools and resources that I have, and she's doing this for me, then it builds that level of respect. I always believe that you have to respect somebody else in order for them to respect you. Like respect, ideally, it's something that should automatically happen. But also I believe that respect, just like trust, is, Brene Brown talked about it, a jar of marbles for trust. And so like there's a baseline of coming into a relationship, you have a standard of trust and respect, but with every interaction, like you can lose marbles or you can add marbles to the jar. Mm-hmm. And sometimes like there's really bad situations that can occur where you can tip the jar over and then it's really hard to start over again. So I think keeping that analogy in mind, that everything that you do contributes to building respect with a team. Like, do your actions match up with what you're telling them to do? And the same with trust. So in regards to like, do they take me seriously? Do they respect me? Do your actions match your words? It's really easy for people in management positions to say that the rules don't apply to me because I'm in this role. I need to do this for some outlier reason. And so changing things to benefit you. And there are probably certain circumstances where there will be different things that apply to the team than you. If that's the case, then it needs to be clearly communicated why there are extenuating circumstances that allow that. Otherwise, if you're just personally doing it because you can, then the team will not take you seriously. They will not take what you're asking of them seriously. And it just then contributes to poor performance and hinders morale and retention on the team. And so respect and being taken seriously really comes with, do you do what you say you're going to do? And do you lead by example?
Definitely. And still so important to be leading by example. And like you said, the rules should still apply to you and you should be setting them for your team and living by them as well. So what other challenges did you face? What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced in that management role?
I would say some of the biggest challenges is, one of the first ones and we talked about this briefly, was annual reviews. And so the first time that I did an annual review, again, it was the first team that I had really hired everyone on staff, and I didn't know the importance of the annual review. I had my own previously, but I didn't understand like the impact of the importance of it and how it impacts someone's feelings and their outlook and their performance and all of that. And so in going through and getting ready for the performance review, I didn't prepare for it like I should have. I didn't go through each individual step and really be intentional about giving it time and thought. I was just checking it off on my list. And so then when it came down to have that conversation with the employee, I was really like half effort through it. I didn't give it my all, and the employee could feel that. And they were really discouraged, and they shared that discouragement with others, and it became a learning opportunity for me on the impact that my words have on my team, how I need to prepare for every situation, because I may not understand like how it's received, and so I need to be intentional with my words and my actions. And so I just felt so bad about that, because I had, it wasn't intentional. Like, they were valuable and they did great work, but there was nothing that stood out to me that was like outstanding. And I think that's like the key here is like, when you're a leader, you're going to have team members with all different types of performance. You're going to have people that struggle. You're going to have people that do what it needs just to meet the performance expectations. And then you're going to have people that go above and beyond. And the people that go above and beyond are going to be easy. I mean, you can see those accomplishments. They're easy to like document, to share, and to put in their personnel file. The people that have challenges, again, same thing, like they're visible. You know it, you've talked about it, you've observed it. But sometimes it's those people that are just like in the middle, that are just doing what they need, that it's going to be more challenging to have those conversations. And so hindsight being 2020, that's where it's more critical, again, to have like those one-on-one conversations, to get to know the employee, like what's important to them, what are their goals, like what, is driving them, what are their situations. Because I would say like then years later in a different position, I had another employee who was a slow learner, and it took them a while to get up to speed on new information. And because it was like in a compliance industry, there's a lot of detail. And so having that conversation with that individual was really helpful, because then I could understand like the specific things that they struggled with. But I also saw that they really wanted to learn. They really wanted to try. And so by having that conversation and really understanding them better, then I could give them more room to learn, and tools that they needed and support that they needed. And then over time, they became a mentor for other new employees. So I think tying that all together from like the first part, where it's like a huge challenge, and then just learning like how to better communicate and to ask those questions and really get to know your employees so that you can support them, is really critical, because it's the difference between discouraging somebody so that they no longer want to show up and perform and they look for another job, and someone that then can continue to excel because they know that you support them and that they can shine within that business and then help others on the team excel as well.
That's awesome. So with this hindsight of, the annual reviews are really important, what would you say is really important to prepare? Like, what would you prepare now before going into an annual review?
So it again ties back to one-on-ones. So the more often that you have the one-on-ones, the more information that you have on a regular basis. So it makes the annual reviews a lot easier. That wasn't the case when I first started out. And so when it's been a year and you don't have like documentation of things throughout the year to what they've done well at, what their learning opportunities, what challenges they've encountered and overcome, different things of that nature, then it makes it a lot more challenging when it comes to annual reviews, because I mean, we're human. We're not going to remember things. And so typically then when it comes to that time, you're going to remember the things that probably happened within the last quarter, the last 90 days, which really isn't reflective of the entire year and their growth during that time. So the frequency and cadence of those one-on-ones is key in making sure that you document them, and whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and seeing like their progression and growth during that time. So that way, then you do have things that are tangible that you can address and talk about during the annual review. So that makes it a lot easier for you as a leader, but then also more effective when you're talking about specific metrics or specific company values that need to be addressed.
And ideally, both quantitative and qualitative. In fact, we know some large businesses have completely abolished the annual reviews and they just don't run them. They've replaced that with regular and ongoing feedback. So it's kind of like an exam. Don't leave it until, the last week just to cram and do everything. You should kind of be putting the work in every week or regularly when you're speaking to your employees to make sure that you have something very valuable and have good feedback. And we know that people act on feedback much better if they receive it immediately just after something, they're more likely to remember it. So I think, like you said, coming back to not just the annual review being the one big time where you have communication with your employees. So what is our next communication tip for managers?
I would say also be aware of your delivery and also your physical presentation, meaning how you come across to people. I think it's really, I'll say for myself, when I'm extremely focused on my work, it's easy for my presence, my face to be very serious.
Do you have a serious face?
It may appear that I'm not approachable.
Can you show us your serious face when you're working?
It's probably during this call when I'm very focused on delivering a point. Right, exactly. But I think so just being cognizant of how you come across, both in your vocal delivery, but also in your physical delivery, that you're approachable, and how your demeanor, if you're positive, negative, because the energy that you bring to the room, that you bring to the team is transferable. People vibe off of that and pick it up. And so if you come in to the team, I know most of us are working online now, but let's say that you enter a virtual meeting, how you immediately greet people, and just your body language. Is it open? Is it smiling? Is it making eye contact as much as we can through a video? Just those little things really allow other people to show up and feel seen and feel comfortable having a conversation. And even sometimes those chats where you just say, hi, I'm glad to see you, glad you're here. And then words and how we deliver them. So I tend to be a very direct person. And so I have to be very aware that when I do share information or have an ask, that how I deliver it is received well, because otherwise someone may be confused, they may take offense, and really I'm just in the moment and making a direct ask. Is nothing more, nothing less. And so I don't think that it's necessary that we need to be flowery and add a ton of extra verbiage in order to send the message. But I do think that it's including a greeting and recognizing the person and seeing that they're there is key. And then also making sure that you appreciate them. I think a lot of times we're so busy in our own work as managers, even as employees, that we don't pause to recognize the efforts of people on the team. And yes, there are things that are just part of our job, but it doesn't matter. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for the effort that you put into the project. All of those things make a huge difference, and they are breathing oxygen into somebody's work. Like it gives them the initial fuel and energy that they need to continue going on when they have outside stressors and outside work. And I can remember like some of my favorite bosses and mentors are ones that recognized my work and took time to send a note or a card. And I still have those now. So I think really like your impact on others is so much greater than sometimes we realize because, again, of the own work that we have. So just being aware of, again, your presence, how you come across to people, what you say, what you do, it means a lot.
Definitely. And I remember one of my first managers, he would typically come in and say good morning to everyone before he sat down, and he'd always be quite cheerful. And some days he would come in and just sit right down at his desk and kind of focus, and he'd have that face. I definitely have this face when I'm focused on something. My family always tell me, why are you making that face? So he would make that face and we would all think, what's happened? Has one of us done something wrong? Because we always think it's about us sometimes. And I think, oh, what have we messed up now? What account is really angry and we've caused an issue? So I think just being aware that sometimes you shouldn't be in a bad mood, or if you are, you need to like suck it up and just get on the call and don't transfer the rest of that bad mood to everybody.
Yeah, I think, yes, just being conscious of that. And I'll say also too, like as leaders, we're human too. So, if there's something going on, like you can share to the extent that you're comfortable. I don't have a tendency to overshare because I don't think that it's relevant or important because we're there to serve the team. But also too, I think it's important to still have that relationship that we're human too and that we struggle with different things. I think sometimes by opening up and having those conversations, then you get your team to open up as well, because a lot of times they can see us as invincible, or like there's this appearance that anybody that's in position of power is like invincible or perfect, or certain things don't affect them. And I know that that has been the tradition for a lot of years. And well, I think that there is value in emotional maturity and emotional discipline. There are times where it is helpful to open up and say, like, these are the things that are going on and let's address them. Let's share them. Let's have a conversation about it and then like keep moving. I would say specifically, like if there's, the pandemic, for example, I think like it stresses everybody. So if you're a leader to say, look, this is stressing me out just as it is you, I'm sure. And like, these are the different things that I am doing. These are the different areas maybe that I'm struggling with, and opening up and having that conversation with your team puts everybody at ease because one, then they know that they're not struggling alone, that you can come together and talk about ideas about how you can work through the situation, but also like not dwelling on it, because the point of being a leader is to inspire hope, to lead the way, and to help people. So there's a balance there, and you need to keep that in mind when you're going through those types of conversations.
And you also bring up a really good point about most of us, or a lot of us, working from home now, and communication, your physical presence, your mood will be very different. You don't see people in the office all day. So I wonder what advice you might have or suggestions for managers who are doing this remotely in order to be able to maintain that for their teams.
So like one-on-ones, if you're not able to obviously meet, and a lot of us aren't anymore, you can still have phone conversations. Like, don't force people to do video conversations. People are exhausted of video conversations, video meetings.
Yeah.
A walking phone call is so much better because then you can both like, there's something about like being out in nature and walking, and like you have a little bit more clarity of thought. And so even if it's just for like 15 minutes a week, checking in to say, like, how are you doing? How are your projects doing? What do you need help with? What's coming up on your plate? Those little things that show that you care, that you're making time for them, but also like respectful of like their energy and their space. I think there's also this fear that because people are working remotely, that they're afraid that they're not getting their work done or they're not being as productive because you can't see them in the office. And it's really important, more now than ever, is to continue to build in that trust. And so, again, just checking in, doing the phone call, sending them notes, even sometimes if it's just like a meme or a GIF that's relevant to something that you know about them. I think there's different people that you have different, conversations with. So, for example, I had an employee that loved cartoons, comics. They had their own comic store, and they wanted to run their own business, and I knew that was important to them. And so, like, I could share things that were relevant to that individual because it made sense to them. That wouldn't make sense to anybody else. That's showing that you care about them. So I think we can do that more now. Is like, if you have those conversations, what are the little things that will cheer them up? Maybe it's just sending like an audio book. A lot of times it doesn't have to be expensive, and there's a budget for it within the company, but to show that you care and that you're there to support them, even if you can't see them. And maybe it's sending a snack. There's lots of different things that you can do. And so I think, again, just remembering that we're all in this together. And I know it's a cliche, but really, like, we're all human. We all have stresses. We all want to be seen. And so what can you do to support them?
Yeah, and like you said, it's really important to just have a personalized approach for every person, right? Because everyone's going to be a little bit different. And if you're paying attention, if you're listening, then you can do something that's going to be, that's going to hit the mark. And we've actually got a relevant question that's just come in. I'll pop that up. So do you find it challenging dealing with cultural differences in attitudes and behaviors at work? Thanks so much, Neve.
Thank you for the question. So I think that's a great question, and especially in the climate that we're in, where there's an increased focus on inclusion, diversity, and making sure that our numbers within our teams reflect that. So I'll start from the beginning, that through the entire course of my career, whether hiring, promoting, working beside, it's always been diverse. I've been blessed in that opportunity. So it's been rare that I haven't worked with people that were not from a different culture. What I would say is that there sometimes seems to be, within a lot of literature at this time, that's more formalized, that it makes it tough and just sticky, and it's not. It doesn't need to be that way. Like, at the end of the day, like what I was saying earlier, is we all share similar fears, similar concerns. We all still want the same things out of life. So if you just treat the individual in front of you with respect and care, and ask questions to get to know who they are, what they value, what's important to them, like, leave everything outside. Like, I don't care what people's religion is. I don't care, like, what their political beliefs are. Like, who are you as a person? And, like, what's important to you? And then once you get to know that person, then you can, like, really help them. And I would say probably 80% of my last team, and that might be a little bit higher, was from a different culture. And so I didn't have a challenge working with them, because, again, I saw that as individuals. Now, I will say, like, each individual is going to have different things that are important to them. And so, yes, you will have different challenges with each individual person, because they have different desires, they have different dreams, they have different stressors at home. But if you have those conversations to get to know who they are, then it makes it so much easier to work with them. And so, just making sure that I'm answering your question completely.
It is
the attitudes and behaviors. Yeah, I do think that there are behaviors that are innate to certain cultures, but also I would encourage you to be careful with that, because a lot of times we have this stereotype of cultures that has been presented to us through the media that's wrong. It may apply to certain people, but it doesn't apply to all. And so again, that goes back to the importance of building those one-on-one relationships, because you really do yourself a disservice if you assume that because they belong to a certain culture, they're automatically going to have this attitude or behavior or belief or whatever the case may be. Every single person is going to be different. And so I think if anything, yes, there is a challenge probably when you're first starting to develop those relationships. And that challenge comes from fear of being rejected, fear of embarrassment, fear of like it's awkward to have conversation and not knowing where it is. But there's also strength in being vulnerable, strength in having the courage to have those conversations. And it's really just like, if you're mindful and intentional about your words and how you come across, and really genuinely show that you care, that you're curious, that you want to get to know them for who they are and to help them, and then everything else you can wash away. So I would really encourage to anyone listening, like those one-on-one relationships are critical, whether you're leading a team or just building relationships with people from different cultures.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I think what came to mind when I was looking at the question as well were just attitudes towards work or work-life balance, even, for example. I know this is definitely something that comes up when I'm working in the UK or Europe and talking to people from the States. Working hours or, taking holidays, this is extremely different. And when I'm managing a team that's across both, I think that that definitely comes up. I'll just bring up a response. Great answer. I definitely think that women in senior roles tend to be better at seeing the individual rather than necessarily the cultural differences. But what do you think about attitudes towards work?
Now, that's a great question. So, yes, there is definitely a difference between like
Right.
state and European culture or other countries. So, one, upfront, I haven't had to address that. I haven't had that within my experience where I need to like figure out how to adapt to that. So I think it goes back to like anytime when you're in a new situation is getting to know the other person and like what is like their standard, and then also understanding like what the company needs, and then trying to figure out like how can you balance that within the middle. I would say even within the pandemic, like there's been such a shift in work performance standards because people now obviously they've had kids at home, and so there's a lot of what was structured previously has been thrown out the window, and there's a lot more flexibility in like scheduling and projects and work. So specifically, like I think defining what needs to be done, like what are the things that the business needs to obtain, what are the business goals, and like what are the individual goals, and then how people choose to like achieve it. That's where probably we need to have a lot more flexibility in saying like, okay, if you choose to like have a different schedule, if you need like more break time or whatever the case may be, as long as the work gets done, me personally, I don't care. Like as long as the work gets done and the work gets done well, how you do it or when you do it really doesn't matter to me. Now, I will say how you do it, there will be some nuance to that because there are certain industries and certain types of work where it is very particular, and that's important. But in regards to like cultural differences, where I think the laid back and get work done, and work is I was thinking about this the other day. I think the biggest is some people choose like work just like it's a means to survival, where other people live to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a huge difference because it impacts how people show up and their drive and what they do. And there's room for both, and there's a reason for both. So I believe that you can find some middle ground or balance in between the two. So again, great question. Thank you for asking and making me think about that.
Well, I guess it's also sometimes a company defining what their culture is going to be. And I think that's going to become increasingly important as we're working more globally and remotely with employees everywhere with so much flexibility. It's going to be up to every business to define that and communicate that to their organization. But I know we're coming up to time. So, Melissa, I'd love to recap, what you think your 5 communication tips for managers are, and then also just to hear more about what you're doing right now.
Great, thank you. So first one, share your goals. Make sure that you clearly define your goals if you're wanting to move up in a position, whether you want to move up into management or whether you're already in management and want to move up to an executive position. Then make sure that you define your boundaries and reset them as needed when working with peers. That you are, number 3, self-aware with how your words are received. 4, being open to learning from your team, asking questions and making sure that you have that open dialogue. And then 5, understanding how you may need to adapt your communication style to, again, like the needs of different teams or different cultures, like you were saying. And so just being aware of your presence.
That's great. So Melissa, tell us a little bit more about what you're working on right now.
So my favorite project right now is a little bit traditional. It's going back to having a monthly print newsletter for leaders in business. And it focuses on 3 pillars: leadership, mindset, and operations, specifically like customer success. And I send that out every month to readers, and I love it. It's an easy way for people to step away, unplug, and to get some information that's relevant to their role that can encourage them and empower them to be better leaders.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will share the details in the comments below, so do look out for those. But Melissa, thank you so much for joining me this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure
Thank
just
you,
getting to know you and hearing your story. Yeah, feel free to post any questions and we will respond to those. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.